Once again, MPs rejected Theresa May's Brexit plan, albeit by the smallest margin yet. The Prime Minister was able to persuade some key Brexiteers to back her plan, including Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab. But the DUP remained resolute in its opposition. Let's cross live to London and Dublin for the very latest. Georgina Wright from the Institute for Government and Shona Murray, Europe correspondent from Euronews. Thanks both for joining us on Sunday Politics today. Georgina, first of all, 3 front pages this morning reporting Tory backbenchers will block any attempt at calling a general election. How realistic a prospect do you think it is that we'll be back at the polls sooner rather than later?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. It's actually the question that a lot of EU leaders are asking as well. You know, how likely is a general election? Look, we know that actually the Prime Minister alone cannot call for a general election. You need 2/3 of the House of Commons to support that. So whether there is enough support for a general election remains to be seen.
Sunday Times reporting the Prime Minister's facing cabinet resignations if she moves towards a no deal or if she backs a customs union. She is caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've always known that Brexit has been a hugely divisive issue. I mean, it's not just the country that's split down the middle, it's also Parliament and the Cabinet itself. You know, you have those who are saying, absolutely, we cannot go for a no deal. And then you've got those who are saying, we can't go for a softer form of Brexit. You know, we stood on a manifesto, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is going to hinge on what happens tomorrow and whether any of the positions actually manages to secure a majority.
Shona, how would you sum up the reaction in Brussels to this week's events in Westminster?
I think people in Brussels are still quite baffled, I suppose, by the scenes, the political environment in the UK. I think there was real disappointment that the 29th of March passed without any real pathway, in terms of what's going to happen next. In relation to the, let's say, possibility of a general election, most in the EU think that this will solve nothing because both main parties will continue to speak out both sides of their mouth because they don't have a consensus. They're both quite divided when it comes to what Brexit means. I think there's a bit of bafflement that, for example, the DUP continued to reject the withdrawal agreement, even though from Brussels' perspective and from many member states' perspective, including the Irish government, but also anyone else you speak to, the French, etc., they see the access for Northern Ireland as having unfettered access to the single market, the customs union, any UK free trade deals that the British government do eventually succeeding signing off on, and that the DUP would reject this opportunity is quite astonishing. So I think there's quite a lot of bewilderment and concern as to what happens next. As you said there, the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, will meet with Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron next week, and they'll be looking for solutions, I suppose, from Dublin as to how to preserve the integrity of the single market, the customs union and the Good Friday Agreement.
Do you think that they will put the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar under pressure to reveal the Irish government's plans for a no-deal Brexit, which of course remains a possibility at this stage? Some people say more than that, a probability.
Yeah, I mean, of course, those conversations have had to be had. And I think that the Irish government is at least off the record anyway and, acknowledged that these would be very difficult conversations that would have to be had with the EU when it comes to the border issue. And because Ireland is in a very difficult situation now of being a very committed EU member state, committed to the single market and the customs union and also the Good Friday Agreement. But also these solutions have to be made not by unilateral decision by Dublin, but also by the UK, who has an obligation to this internationally binding treaty to ensure there's no hard border. And also the British government has to abide by WTO rules if it's not in the single market and the customs union. And the EU is also a co-guarantor. So it's not really just down to Dublin. Everybody has to have those difficult conversations. And that's why I suppose Brussels and Dublin keep saying that the backstop is the only solution. That Britain, just because if it leaves it in a no-deal scenario, can't just walk away from those obligations.
Georgina Wright in London, just one final quick question to you. As we look ahead to a potentially very difficult week for Theresa May in Westminster, how do you see tomorrow and the rest of the week unfolding?
Well, I think everything hinges on tomorrow. Can one of these votes give any sign, not only here in the UK, but also to the EU on how the UK intends to proceed? Now, if you look at last week's indicative votes, for example, Common Market 2.0, it came fourth, but actually around 167 MPs abstained on that. Will those MPs vote differently? Will Labour, if they feel their alternative plan cannot secure a majority in Parliament, will they whip in favour of Common Market 2.0? How will the SNP react? I mean, there are lots of questions, but I think for the Prime Minister, the government, and also for the EU, they're really hoping that tomorrow not only delivers some form of majority for a position, but also that that position can actually be delivered in Brussels. So we shall see.
We need to leave it there. Thanks both very much indeed, Georgina Wright and Shona Murray. Thank you.